So we hit the valley and we're flying up and back, and we do that probably 4 times, I think, up and back. And each time, we're hearing the enemy saying, hey, there's the gunship. Okay, there's the, the Blackhawk. There's the other gunship. Should we shoot them down? Should we not? And we get in probably 500-600 meters into the valley and just start taking ground fire. You can see the tracer rounds coming, and then all of a sudden just wham, right into the tail of the aircraft. Our helicopter pitches up on its nose. I'm looking through, I'm in the very rear seat facing forward, and I can see all the way through the pilot's windscreen, and there's the rapids, like filling the whole windscreen. I'm like, oh, damn, we're dead.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear our first combat story from a military intelligence linguist and signal interceptor, Clay Jensen. Clay deployed 6 times to both Iraq and Afghanistan and spent considerable time helping to get our Afghan allies out of Afghanistan after the fall. Clay was in a Blackhawk when it was shot out of the sky while trying to identify the location of Al-Qai'da's then number 2 leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in Afghanistan. Clay was also forward deployed in 2007 for a week out on his own with just a few other soldiers at an outpost to identify the location of Bin Laden during what became a failed raid to capture AQ's leader at the time, and listeners will recall that our former guest Mike Rutledge was also part of that operation flying in the 160th. Clay supported clandestine and top secret operations working alongside NSA and other 3-letter agencies in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Latin America as part of both the 82nd Airborne and 7th Special Forces Group in a Special Operations Team Alpha, or SOT-A. I hope you enjoy this first ever combat story from a signal interceptor who we, as Apache pilots, relied on regularly to triangulate and get us onto targets as much as I did. Clay, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's nice to be here.
So I know you spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, Clay, and I believe also some time in Iraq because you spent a lot of time downrange. We're recording just a couple days after the 20th anniversary of us leaving Iraq, and I know you've spent quite a bit of your own time and energy in retirement supporting what happened with our withdrawal from Afghanistan. I was just curious, how does Iraq strike you now, looking back 20 years on? With a date like this?
There were there's definitely some feeling of, could we have done something different? The push for WMDs and stuff, we've kind of found that's, it was a hopeful at best, situation, but we needed to get him out of there. Just out of the whole Middle East, the whole, and the sad part for me, and I think a lot of guys, is right when the invasion happened, right when we rolled in and secured Fallujah and things. I mean, there's people driving around in convertibles, waving at us, cheering, almost like the liberation of the Netherlands in World War II, the women out on the streets hugging everybody. And then to kind of see that de-evolution down into, kind of sectarian government rule, violence. And then, we declared combat operations over, and the Iraqi government kind of supports some of these groups and kind of that breaking up of the clans and the groups. But, I wish the best to the Iraqi people. ISIS, that whole situation, that broke my heart. We left a vacuum that was kind of filled in there for a while, but, I think everybody should be proud of what we did, especially the people that didn't get to see the beginning and see how happy the people were and how appreciative they were that we'd gotten rid of Saddam.
Yeah, that's a good point, because so many people never saw that part of it.
No.
And, you're talking about ISIS still, like, reports of fighting in Syria and casualties and that sort of thing. And we're still talking about those guys. So, and I know we'll talk more about Iraq and Afghanistan here, but one of the things I wanted to jump to with your upbringing is Japanese and
Yeah.
just Japan in general. And I was
Yeah,
hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
sure. Um, so around end of second grade, I was a terrible kid in class. And then, sitting out in the hallway, sitting in the principal's office. And this is like 6 and 7 years old, and um, finally there was a teacher that said, hey, maybe he's just bored. So basically, for the majority of elementary school, I had one-on-one teacher time. And, you know, we'd do all the tests for math or reading in the first, week. And then it was basically, what do you want to learn? And so I was learning about astronomy and physics and history and things like that, in elementary and doing book reports on Of Mice and Men or Slaughterhouse-Five, in fifth grade. He was part of the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Wilson, my teacher, and they had established a sister city program with a town in Japan. And he was really keen on learning Japanese for that. And so he just asked me, he's like, hey, do you want to learn Japanese with me? And I'm like, yup. So
As so many fifth graders do.
right. So, we did a lot. We went to the library and got, the old vinyl records of Learn a Language and the Berlitz books. And this is in the very beginning of kind of the VTC world, with the 10-foot diameter satellite dishes. And so we did some of that with Japanese instructors. And yeah, it was great. It was great, at a young age in a small blue collar Midwest town, being able to kind of connect with another culture and world was really cool.
Was he a Japanese speaker, or he was just
No.
learning it himself?
Yeah, he had gone on one of those Chamber of Commerce, business alliance trips, and was like, man, I really want to learn Japanese. So he came back from that, and we started learning Japanese. So,
Oh man.
yeah.
Like, did you ever end up going to Japan?
Yeah, I did. So, I played soccer growing up. I got pretty decent, pretty good at it. And I was an alternate for the US under-17 team. And
Dang.
I guess through fate or whatever, I got to go to Japan in 1993. They were playing in the Youth World Championships. And yeah, I went to Japan for like 12 days and walked around. And it was funny because, in my mind, I'm like, man, 5-6 years ago, I could kind of get around and stuff. So after like 2 days, I was, buying things on the street, ordering food, asking people for directions, on the street. And it was really cool. So,
How influential was, I don't know, Japanese culture on you growing up?
well, I got really into the whole Zen poetry and kind of mindset and philosophy. Not practicing Buddhist or anything like that, but just really into the readings and the teachings and the stories and stuff. And it was funny because as a fifth grader in 1986, Karate Kid had just come out, and it's like, oh yeah, Japanese, so I thought that was really cool. And then later on, it really just became, I want to see the rest of the world. I've seen this place. It's amazing. I mean, that was the first metropolis, if you will, that I've ever been to. It was Tokyo. I hadn't been to New York. I hadn't been to LA. And here I
That's
am in a town.
crazy. That's the first one you go see, like no English letters.
Right.
It's all different.
Yeah. No, it was great though. It was great.
How this is skipping ahead, so we'll drop back here in a second, but how helpful was trying to learn that language when you later on went through DLI and had to pick up, I think it's Spanish, right? You end up getting.
Yeah, my first one was Spanish. And yeah, I mean, in high school, we had a Russian program. And it's really funny because the teacher for that, Mr. Engel, he had been a signals intelligence interceptor in Berlin in the
That's cool.
70s and 80s. So he was a Russian linguist in the army, intercepting Soviet comms in Berlin, and I it's funny because looking back, I'm like, man, he had the same MOS, but at the time, I never really thought about it, and then when I enlisted, I just kind of didn't put that connection together. But yeah, I wasn't great at Russian, but I picked it up, you know. And then yeah, Spanish, and then French, and then a couple others that we just kind of picked up, the
Jeez.
romance. So
Well, I've
yeah.
heard Japanese is just a really challenging one. So I didn't know, like, does that help your mind kind of break the English language a little
Yeah,
bit so you can then learn something else?
it does. And the funny thing is, I learned, and a lot of people learn that by learning foreign languages, you get better at English and English grammar and
Yeah.
things because you're learning something in another language. You're like, man, what is that? What is, the punctuation for this? So you end up, learning better English as well. But, and there's a lot of science behind it, but there's a lot of synapses and things that you have from birth to about 5 years old that just kind of go away after you learn English, or your native tongue, primary language. And then to see those be rebuilt through the process of learning another language. I mean, even going into dreaming in the other language and stuff. So yeah, it's fascinating to me.
That's
Linguistics is yeah.
um I was curious, where in that case does the military come from? Like that interest for you growing up like that?
I mean, ever since I was a kid, I'm a child of the 80s. My grandfather and my father were retired firefighters, so there was kind of this sense of service and
Yeah.
civic duty and things like that already. Um, and yeah, just the pop culture, icons of the day and things. I mean, for me, it was really the guys like MacGyver, or even on the A team where they're taking a bulldozer and turning it into a tank. Just that improvisation and things. I was like, I want to do that when I grow up. Do the intel and behind the scenes kind of stuff. But
What do you think you would have done if you hadn't gone into the military?
yeah, good question. I went to college. I had a soccer scholarship to a small college, and I started out in environmental biology or human biology, and then I was going to be an optometrist of all things.
Quite different.
So, yeah, yeah,
Oh man.
yeah. I was pre-optometry for a year, and then it was like, nah, I don't.
What was the decision for you then to say like, all right, I got to go this other direction with the military?
I'd made a deal with my dad. I was going to join the military at 12 if I could have. Like so. Um, with the whole soccer thing, he's like, just give college a chance, see if you like it. You could even go in as an officer and things. And yeah, I did a year of college. I was like, man, I'm just gonna go. I'd served my time for my dad, and that was it.
Um, what I mean, the A Team, you think MacGyver, and certainly some of the other movies in the 80s
Oh
are
yeah,
big.
like
But
Rambo and all. Yeah,
yeah, so was SF on your list right out of
yeah,
the gates?
yeah. Um, so I wanted to be an SF medic. Um, and I was really intrigued by medicine, and my mom was a nurse, and my dad being a firefighter was also a paramedic. So I had already learned CPR and a lot of things by time I was graduating. However, they didn't have kind of that SF baby, you know streets to SF type program, 18 X-ray. So I was like, okay. And my ASVAB score, was high enough to qualify for the job I ended up getting. And the recruiter was like, hey man, you're gonna reenlist, guaranteed airborne slot, foreign language, top secret clearance, you know, you're gonna be in good, position to go SF. And which I never did end up going through the Q course, but that, it I have no regrets for what I've done, and I really owe that recruiter a beer.
So first of all, what exactly was the MOS? And did that recruiter steer you that way, or was it just because of the results on the test?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I was really fighting for things like infantry at the time, I don't know if it was before your time, but they used to have a MOS called Aero Scout Observer, and it was an enlisted guy that rode side seat
Yeah.
in like a Kiowa or a OH-5 or whatever. They were doing away with that, and so I was like, man, there's nothing else I really want to do. And the recruiter, he had been, I think he was supply or motor transport, something like that, but he had been in an SF group. And he's like, hey, man, you scored high on the ASVAB, you scored high on the language aptitude battery, the DLAB. And he's like, you want to be tactical? This one, you're going to jump out of planes, which means you're going to Fort Bragg. And so I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And it sounded cool, the whole top secret clearance and foreign languages. That was up my alley. So.
And it was intel then, like kind of
Yeah,
right out of the gates.
Signals intelligence, cryptologic linguist. So intercepting enemy communications, transcribing, translating, and then doing that geolocation, kind of that finding where the emitter is.
Yeah. And this is pre 9/11, right? So the threat is vastly different than
very, yeah. But at the same time, we're still in the kind of immediate aftermath of the Pablo Escobar demise. So Colombia just exploded, Panama exploded, Venezuela, everywhere just went kind of nuts with all these different narco groups. And I'm thinking Spanish speaking, tactical, intelligence. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be going to South America, which was really cool to me. That whole.
And did you do that with the 82nd?
I did not. I ended up I ended up going to Ecuador for 5 weeks to work with some guys down at the Mill Group in Quito. And that was, there was intercept and things like that, but it wasn't as Hollywood or as Wazoo type stuff. It was, from a building, US flagged building. And then how long? I think about a month I spent on a merchant marine vessel in the Caribbean,
Wow.
intercepting drug boats, which, I mean, yeah, it was cool. But you're on a boat, you can't really see the shore anywhere, and yeah, you can go fishing when you're not on shift, but it was pretty boring.
You were doing signals type work there?
Yeah. It was an NSA boat.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're just down there trying to locate, the drug runners and planes and boats and subs. And yeah,
I feel like it, and feel free to course correct me on this, but it just seems like from my time at the agency, folks who had that branch that, you kind of went into in the military end up getting real close with the NSA, CIA, DIA, all that mixture of alphabet soup. You're very closely tied together.
Yeah, I worked with all different kinds of everybody, from the 3-letter agencies to the tier units, the law enforcement agencies, foreign, militaries and intelligence organizations. We're just such a low density kind of job. There's not a lot of us. And at the time, I mean, nobody had their own organic other than, the military, NSA collectors, which, even in the 82nd, I'm still an NSA asset.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, we all fall under what's called the U.S. Signals Intelligence System. So reporting channels and everything.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, and we'll get right back to this combat story. As you know, I live in California, where we can have earthquakes and fires, and I grew up in Florida with hurricanes. I know firsthand how natural disasters can quickly and unexpectedly put me and my family in a position where we have to hunker down, shelter in place, and sometimes without power, so I always want to have food available. You can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots Survival Food Kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking good for 25 years super survival food. Handpicked right in a family family-owned facility in the U.S., giving jobs to over 200 Americans, which we love. The kits are compact, sturdy, water-resistant, and stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use the code COMBAT to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including their 3-month survival kit. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com and use COMBAT to get 10% off. That's the number 4patriots.com. Use the code COMBAT and start building your own stockpile today. And now, back to this combat story. So could you talk through what is that type of advanced training that you go through to get skilled in that particular branch? Because we've not had somebody on who has this background.
So there's really two sides of that signals intelligence world. You've got the strategic, which are the people that either work up, at the NSA or at one of the outposts. And then you have the tactical side, which are the people that are actually in the, the military units, whether they're Navy flying on like an EP-3 or, Air Force flying on an RC, whatever, or us, on the ground or Airborne so initial training, I went to basic and then I went immediately to Airborne school. And then I went to Monterey, California for 7 months for Spanish language at the Defense Language Institute, which was a really cool place.
That's Monterey. Awesome. Did you try to get Spanish? Play or were you trying to get Japanese or something else like Asian?
I fought for Spanish, and it was because, again, those language aptitude tests, your scores kind of dictate what languages you qualify for. But in the early 90s, we started getting a lot of Spanish speaking immigrants and into my town and area and stuff. And I really thought, I was like, man, I could really, if I go into the Army for this 5-year enlistment, I can come back and I'm fluent in Spanish. I could work anywhere, working with people. And yeah, so I actually, when I got to DOI, they tried to change me over to Persian Farsi, which in the late 90s, we didn't have anything to do with Iran. I was like, why would I learn that?
Yeah.
Which, Afghan Farsi would have been close, but
true.
Yeah. So Spanish, I was Spanish all the way.
So you do 7 months of Spanish, and then you kind of go to your advanced.
Yeah, and then your AIT, your MOS training school, which for us is out in West Texas at Goodfellow Air Force Base, and that's where you 8 hours a day, you go into a building with headphones on and you're learning how to keep up with Cuban, 5-line letter traffic and code and transcribe and translate counter narcotic, all recorded type stuff. And yeah, I think that was like 5 months of just sitting there with headphones on and just doing Spanish, writing it down as fast as I could. I mean, typing, 80 words a minute from English to Spanish, Spanish to English. And yeah, it was nuts.
Was it enjoyable, that training? Did it make your brain melt at the end of the day?
Yeah. Every day you were just dead. I mean, your brain was just dead. And I talked to the Morse code guys because we'd have a Morse code interceptor on our teams later on. It was the same thing for them. They're just sitting there with headphones, just for 8 hours a day, just trying to get fast enough to keep up with the targets. And yeah, it was nuts. And then for the people that were going tactical, there's a 8-week course down at Fort Huachuca that we went through, and it was kind of, familiarization and how to operate all the different tactical signals intelligence platforms that the Army had at the time. Truck-borne backpack stuff. This is before drones, so we had stuff mounted on the EH-60 Blackhawk, which was called the Quick Fix. Just stuff like that. And then yeah, then I went to the 82nd.
What's it like
Uh,
checking into that unit? I mean, in and of itself, the 82nd is, obviously a very storied
it's tough.
organization, but and then coming in as a linguist, like tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, I'd been in the Army well over a year and a half, what I thought was the Army, and yeah, I get to the 82nd, you're a cherry. I mean, you are less than a person. You have no opinion, you have no ideas, you have no nothing. And yeah, it was tough, but I tell you what, that you get a great foundation for just being a good soldier, sergeant, whatever. I mean, the 82nd, the standards are, at least back then, were pretty high in every way. Um, Accountability, attention to detail, that as a private, you're just getting hammered on that stuff.
And I know we'll talk about kind of the SF side, but in the conventional units, like where do you end up getting slotted within a big organization like that when you have that MOS?
So back then, the divisions all had an MI battalion. So I was part of the 313th Military Intelligence Battalion. When I showed up, Mike Flynn, then General Flynn, National
Wow.
Security Advisor, he was my battalion commander.
Get out of town.
Yeah, yeah, great guy. He's probably one of my favorite officers, that I ever worked with. So,
Jeez.
um, yeah. So, and then within that, you've got five companies. So you have the 3 line companies that one per each brigade. So I was in Charlie Company, and we supported 3rd Brigade of the 82nd, the 505th.
And what's in the company for that, for an MI company like that?
So we had a platoon of SIGINT, we had a platoon of HUMINT, and what they had back then, ground surveillance radar. So those guys would go out and bury these kind of electronic mines that would, they put them along roads or around choke points or whatever to monitor enemy movement, which, that was phased out. But so we had a platoon of those guys, and then a headquarters platoon, just running the company, your supply, NBC, all those types of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had a platoon of signals intelligence. We had one team on a truck. It was a Humvee. It was a mobile jammer and intercept platform. So, and then 2 kind of backpack teams, what we call low level voice intercept. And, you jump in, secure an airfield. You've got the Humvee jamming enemy communications, and we hit the woods and try and hunt down anti-aircraft or whatever.
That's crazy.
So, yeah.
And actually, I've never mentioned this on the air, but my brother-in-law was an Army officer in that MOS. So he's an intel guy,
Oh,
signals.
nice. Yeah.
So I do know quite a bit about it now
Yeah.
from him, but I just wasn't exposed to it on the conventional side.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly learned more about it at the agency, but
Yeah.
a ton of respect. And, I on the ground in Afghanistan, we'd have guys helping us fix on targets all the time, triangulation. Like it was critical. Like we'd be in the air and they'd be telling us what people were saying, where they were.
Yep.
Such an important asset on the ground. So I came to really appreciate it, but just didn't know about it early on.
Yeah, we were kind of like the stepchildren at the time, You just show up to a jump with the heaviest ruck, and people are like, "Who are you?"
You carrying your own like intercept equipment, that's all on you.
Yeah, and 4 or 5 days worth of batteries. You got
God.
12 of those 5590s, 5598s in your ruck. I mean, and the radio to talk back to the rear. And oh, by the way, if you have room, you can shove a whoopee in there. Your poncho liner in there. But yeah, it was all 110 pounds of lightweight intelligence gear.
Especially in the 82nd, where you got to hump it all, man.
Well, and jumps.
Yeah.
It was made it hard to get to the door.
Were you still in the conventional side when 9/11 happens? Where were you at for that?
Yeah, I was in the 82nd. Still, I was just getting ready to go to French language school over at the Special Forces training center. They have their own language school, and they were changing our battalion from being Spanish speakers only to Arabic and French. I think the writing was on the wall. Middle East, Africa, that stuff was starting to get pretty bad. And then 9/11 hit, and it's like, well, all these Arabic and French guys aren't going to do anything for us either. So, but yeah, I was going to switch to French so I could stay in that battalion.
Were you already at DLI for that or no?
No, I was actually
the SF.
Yeah, we were drawing our books because class was going to start the next day. And, we're standing in line to get our French books and dictionaries and stuff. And this guy's like, hey, did you guys hear about that airplane flying into a building up in New York? And, we're all like, I'm thinking, a Cessna, something like what a tourist helicopter. So, we didn't know what it was. And then, yeah, they sent us all home. I get home and I think I'm watching a replay of that first hit. As soon as I turn on the TV, bam. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. And then they're like, oh my God, another one. And I'm like, wait, what? That was, it was like, oh shit, we're going to war.
So did they not then rush you through some other language course? What
No,
did you end up doing?
I ended up staying and doing French. Because for us as linguists, that's a branch assignment. We go to whatever place based off of the language. For us, it's called a control language. So it controls your assignments.
Makes sense.
And, I was like, well, if I learn French, I can then go over to 7th Group or 3rd Special Forces Group, stay on Fort Bragg, not move my house and all that, But yeah, I get word that, we're deploying my unit, 82nd, we're deploying. So I ended up doing a real short version of the French, and graduated with, the maximum score and stuff. I really put my nose to the grindstone, but, transitioning from Spanish to French wasn't that bad. And then, yeah, we shot out the door.
So were you guys went in the first rotation?
We followed the 101st and 10th Mountain by about 2 months, I think.
In Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Gosh, so you spent a lot of time with Afghanistan.
Yeah. I did Afghanistan before the Iraq War even started. Yeah. So
can you talk us through what it was like? That, I mean, nobody had deployed, right? I mean, certainly 101st, 10th Mountain, but I mean, it was still so new to so many people. What was it like for you going in there?
Well, I'm maps. Our maps were Soviet maps in Russian, and they use a different, grid system. They use what we call the Russian curl, where, we have the protractor, and yeah, we're using Soviet maps to navigate. My very first time outside the wire, we're in Kandahar, and they're like, hey, go around, the base within do a few laps within 10 miles or whatever and see what you can hear. And we get out, we turn off the main highway, going from the airfield to Kandahar City. And our Humvees weren't suited for the heat or anything, the dust from the air filters. So our Humvee broke down. And it ended up being vapor lock, and so we all ended up figuring out how to fix that. But I get out of the Humvee to throw the hood up, and I open my door and I go and I get 1 foot out, and I'm like falling forward, and I see the little 3 fingers of death. We're in a minefield, and our tire had just missed one, and it's right outside my door as I'm getting out. And I'm screaming at the driver, guy on my team. I'm like, man, we're in a minefield. How'd you get this far off the road? He's like, I can't see the road. So much dust. Night vision doesn't work, when it's that dusty. It was, so yeah, we made it out of there and back. And there's no EOD support. There's no dogs. It's like, hey, let's back up and stay in our tire tracks kind of shit.
Did you have a terp with you? Like, were you then controlling a terp in that sense?
Yeah. All the time. so yeah, we're sitting there with our gear, intercepting radio traffic or whatever, cell phone so I always had to have an interpreter. And thing about ours they're not the local, Afghanis. They're U.S. citizens that have been recruited by different companies, contractors, and they come over and they have a top secret clearance and they're American citizens, so they're over there unarmed, sitting with us, translating what we hear in our headphones. So
How I'm just curious how nervous you must have been, like your first time outside the wire. We haven't been at war that long. Okay, I remember I didn't go till like 08 and I was like, oh my God, here we go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dude, like the day we got there, some Marine was doing PT on Kandahar and stepped on a landmine right off the side of the road.
No way.
Yeah, right. What ended up becoming the main drag. He was just off the side of the road, and they're like, "Be careful, wear your PT belt." And I'm like, that doesn't protect from landmines.
That's so Army mentality, isn't it?
This Marine hit a landmine. Wear your PT belt. Like, okay, man. So,
oh, geez, dude.
Yeah. But yeah, it was because we had just gotten the IED identification, landmine identification classes and stuff, and I just saw the little 3 wires sticking out, and I'm like, oh my God, this is real. This is real. This is war. What the hell am I doing here?
I'd never heard the 3 fingers of death before. I know what you mean now as you say it. Like
the little landmine with the, it's got the 3 wires sticking out, and if they get moved, it sets off the mine. But
oh, geez. Did you find yourself, were you moving with any ground forces during that first time?
Yeah, so we would always, we would go out one vehicle for us, and then we would always have at that time back in the war, we would always have 2, infantry vehicles with us, and we usually had like the battalion scouts or somebody going out with us because it was really a scout mission and let's hear what we can hear kind of.
Got it. Okay.
And yeah, it was great. We got real close with all those guys and we had fun because at that point in the deployment, they're still trying to figure out where all these battalion operations and stuff are going to be going, and we were like the only guys leaving the wire at that point for the first month.
Would you end up getting into contact at that point in the war?
Yeah. So the first battalion operation we did, I think it was 2 infantry companies, and then we air assault in on 47s. My team and I, we move up towards the crest of one of the hills, and we dig in. We're digging in, almost like a fighting position, but for us to get down and throw stuff over the top and have our antenna out, and we get off the Chinooks and start spreading out, and immediately there are enemy talking about shooting down the Apache that's flying overhead, and hey, if they come this way, get ready to ambush them. And so within 15 minutes of hitting the ground, we're telling the battalion command, hey, here's bad guys here, there's bad guys here, tell that helicopter to get out of here for a minute, and that paid dividends for the whole deployment. That was the first thing we'd done with that whole large battalion. And,
could you talk us through, Clay, what it's like? You mentioned you're relaying back to maybe the command element.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine, and this is probably just my own myopic look at being in combat, like in an aircraft, the radios are crazy, and you're constantly trying to understand what's going on around while understanding what's happening on the radio and who needs what. And you got a battalion commander talking, you got guys on the ground who need something, and and now you're trying to synthesize bite-sized tactical info that's coming in and what's important and what's not in another language from a terp.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk through, and I know we're in sensitive territory, so nothing crazy here, but just what is it like? How are you helping to support the battle in that regard? Like, what does your operation look like as you get set and dug in and you start getting the terp going?
Yeah. So for us, we're mainly monitoring that enemy chatter. But we've also got to keep track of where all the friendly elements are Because if they, we can't shut down the whole operation because some enemy somewhere is going to engage someone, and they're like, okay, well, who's going to get engaged, So we're keeping track of that. We're monitoring those friendly radios. We're also talking to aircraft, like you said, to vector them in and on that common air ground frequency or whatever. And yeah, it can get pretty complex. I'd kind of relate it to being like an air traffic controller in two languages, because I got Pashto in this ear and English in this ear, and I'm got a little laptop tough book that I'm working on, and an FM radio, VHF radio, and a SATCOM radio. I mean, it's technically heavy.
Are you typing out on the tough book? Are you typing out what you're hearing? You're transcribing what you're hearing in English, or are you trying to take down like almost intel of what are the nuggets?
All of the above. So each report, starts out with the frequency, the time up, time down, the call signs or names you've heard, references to locations or equipment, and then, oh, by the way, here's everything they said. So you're going at the speed they're speaking. So we do record and we can go back, but that's usually after the fact.
Yeah.
I mean, as it's happening, you're on the fly.
Jeez.
So.
Were there any times, and this might take us to the SF side of things, but were there moments where you felt like you kind of held almost the outcome of a battle in your hands in terms of,
oh yeah,
we know what's about to happen. We can hear, like, we're listening to the enemy. Could you talk through one of those, even if it takes us to SF time? I'm just curious how that feels.
Well, there's two that readily come to mind. I just talked about that one where, first mission we get off and then we're like, hey, the enemy, they're probably about a half mile to our west, maybe further. I'd never done direction finding in the mountains of Afghanistan yet, so I'm still trying to figure out signal strength. And that's the other thing, I'm measuring signal strengths and azimuths, and there's a whole lot that goes into it. But we were moving to the province of Khost, and a mission, really large mission in the beginning of the war called the Khost Bowl. And
that's where I was based out of, so I know it well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I helped establish Salerno. I mean,
that's where I lived.
It was empty Heskos when we got there. So.
Oh man.
Yeah. But so we go into a town, Burmel. I don't know if you remember that, the Burmel Bazaar.
Yeah.
So we were going through the Burmel Bazaar looking for an Al-Qai'da arms dealer and financier, and nobody's saying anything. And so we're right outside of the bazaar set up, and we start intercepting this guy talking about, hey, I need, you to meet me here, you to meet me here. I need you to bring my money. You need to bring the vehicles. You need to bring this, because they're getting out of Dodge. They're going to Pakistan. So we pinpoint it to this kind of lone compound. And I look at the commander, a guy named Marty Schweitzer. And I'm like, hey, sir, I think our guy Usmani's in this compound right over here, and they're getting ready to leave. He's like, you think so? And I'm like, that's our best guess. And he's like, all right. So he sends a company over there, and they surround the compound and do a, kind of that soft knock on the front gate. And they open the gate, and the guy's in perfect English. He's like, I've been expecting you. And so they bring him back, and this is funny. The colonel starts talking to him, and the guy's like, something about him speaking English. He's like, yes, I speak English. Colonel's like, well, I hope you speak Spanish, because I'm sending your ass to Guantanamo. It was like, oh man. But yeah, I mean, we're out there, looking for hours and hours and going through everywhere. And all of a sudden we're just like, hey, sir, he's right over there. He's getting in those black Land Rovers, the only ones we've seen.
There's got to be times where they're like, thank God we have you here. Let's kick a couple guys off the aircraft so we could fit you in to
That
be
has
there.
happened. That has happened. Just because they're like, wait, we need two of those guys. It's kind of, we're kind of like the hound dogs,
Yep.
and yeah, there's been plenty of times where it's been like, hey, stop, they're going to ambush us. There's an IED right up the road. They're waiting for us to hit it. A lot of stuff like that, especially in Iraq. And then, yeah, I'm sure we'll get to it. But when I had my helicopter shoot down, I mean, we were listening to them the whole time.
Oh God.
We knew they were going to start firing at us. I mean, we knew.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk on that one. I mean, I think you transitioned over like around 2004. Is that right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
SF. Where does that come from for you, that desire? You mentioned staying at Bragg. Was that kind of the crux of it, or you had always wanted to do SF?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to be in that world. And then not knowing much about it in training, especially about my MOS and how it works over there. But, I had kind of thought that's where I was going once I got to Bragg. And then got switched at the replacement depot on Bragg to the 82nd. So, and at the time, like you said, I went to the 82nd, and I really didn't do a lot of that drug war, South America intel work. But those guys were, the SOT-A teams over in 7th Group, they were going down there, 6 months on, 6 months off. So just hearing their stories and everything was awesome. It was light years ahead of what I was doing. And then after going to Afghanistan and then Iraq with the 82nd, I was like, I'd been in the 82nd in the same platoon in the same company for 6 years. And
that's a long time. That's a long time.
Yeah. Which isn't, again, it's not weird for the 82nd. It's kind of like one of those places like SF or the Ranger Regiment. I mean, you can stay your whole career in the 82nd because nobody's volunteering for it. But yeah, I just my human resources manager, they were talking to me about going to the schoolhouse or be a drill sergeant or something like that. And I was like, no, man, there's a war going on. I'm not gonna go hide out for 3 years. So I just told them, I said, hey, just send me to 7th Group. It's right here and I want to go. And they're like, oh yeah, they didn't think I wanted to stay tactical or whatever. So
got it.
All I had to do was ask. So
how hard is it to be in that community without going through the Q course?
You're constantly proving yourself, which everybody there is. The guys on the team are constantly proving themselves. Every support MOS and things, but I think the difference for us is we're like one of the few elements other than those ODAs, A teams, that have unilateral missions. I mean, SOT-A, we deploy on our own missions and stuff, and you don't have the other, even direct support personnel aren't doing that. So, I mean, yeah, it's constant hard training. And every time you walk in the door with a new SF team, you're proving yourself in every way, tactically, intelligence, personality is a big one, in that world. If you don't fit in, you're not going to fit in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was tough. Just not having that baseline, So
we could I have you define SOT-A for people who are listening who aren't familiar? We've had somebody on from this element before.
Okay,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's a special operations team Alpha, and we are the signals intelligence unit in your basic special forces group. There's 3 SOT-A teams per battalion, so 1 for each SF company. And we either deploy independently or we deploy with an ODA and do, their SIGINT, a lot of their intel work. I was cross-trained in HUMINT, went to strategic debriefer course and stuff. And yeah, and a lot of times we end up doing a lot of their commo, help out with that. Because all we do is commo, so yeah, our job is to provide that force protection, that target identification, target development, build pattern of life so they can go in when they want to, where they want to.
Yeah.
It's a great job. I loved it.
It
It was
almost
hard to
sounds
prove
like,
yourself, but it was fun.
I bet it sounds like it combines several roles that I would see at the agency between not
Hmm.
just the SIG collector as the core. There's the human side, there's
Yeah.
targeters, like they all kind of have that specialty, and you almost do all of them in one in that world.
Yeah. If we deploy with the unit, we have our own targeting analysts and signals intelligence analysts and stuff. But I mean, if there's 4 of us going to Paraguay to work with the FBI,
Exactly.
we're our own targeting analysts, and so it's, yeah, I mean, again, we got 4 people. They're all, at least E5 and above, mostly E7s on the teams. And then each group has an advanced team, which can be up to 4 E8s on the team. So yeah, I mean, we get to do some pretty cool stuff.
What was the difference from your perspective, having gone to combat twice with a conventional unit in that same type of MOS?
Mm-hmm.
Now seeing it from the other side in the SF community.
But for one, I was trusted a lot more by the people I was working with, whether it was a team leader, company commander, battalion commander, teammates, Whereas in the conventional army, again, you're that ash and trash kind of strap hanger MI guy. And then, towards the end you work out, but you're never an infantryman, you're never one of the shooters, and which is fine. I'm not trying to be, but in the SF world, there's a maybe 12 guys on the ODA, and then we throw 2 to 4 SOT-As out there with them. I mean, I'm driving, I'm running the main gun on a truck, I'm running the rear gun, I'm doing everything they're doing. I not in the same way, but I'm out there with them doing everything. I run up to the door. Okay, he's in this house, and then I back off, and the breacher goes up. And yeah, it was a big difference as far as what I was kind of allowed to do, and then again what the unit's allowed to do. I mean, your average SF team, I mean, they're running a battalion to a brigade size area of land, and you've got a captain in charge of 300 Afghanis and Americans. It's definitely big boy stuff in that aspect. Whereas even an infantry commander in whatever army unit, I mean, they don't go out without hire everything.
Can you take us to one of the tougher moments that you went through? And maybe this is, I've been dying to ask about the helicopter crash. And I know you got, for people who are watching or who are listening who can't see, you've got looks like a small model Blackhawk behind you.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is just a reminder of this, but yeah, let's talk about
I love
your helicopter incident.
I love that helicopter. It's yeah. So we were up in the Konar province, based out of Naray and another small site called Barikaut. And we were being moved down to Jalalabad, to the Jaff airfield, and for a large mission. Well, as soon as we got there, we had some targeters run up to us, agency people, and say, "Hey, we've got to get you on this helicopter right now. You're heading straight back up there." We pinged Zawahiri, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who at the time was the deputy commander of Al-Qai'da, who then took over after bin Laden died, and then he was finally killed last year in a strike. But yeah, they said, "Hey, we've got him. We know he's within 6 miles of this dot, and we're going to fly you up there, and you're going to refine the target, and we've got 2 Apaches, and they're going to smoke him." So yeah, so we run out there and throw all of our SIGINT gear on the helicopter, mount the antennas on the bottom and everything, and we just go. And we get up there and start flying up and down this valley. It's called the Lunde Sin Valley, and that's where Camp Keating, the movie The Outpost and all of that. That's where all that happened. I mean, it's just bad area.
What year are we at right now?
This is 2007. So the
Yeah.
outpost thing happened the next following year.
Yeah.
And I mean, my deployment, there were plenty of gunfights involving well over 100 bad guys too. So, I mean, it was just insane how many Taliban, AQ, whatever you want to call them, were up there. So we hit the valley and we're flying up and back. And we do that probably 4 times, I think, up and back. And each time, we're hearing the enemy saying, hey, there's the gunship. Okay, there's the Blackhawk, there's the other gunship, should we shoot him down? Should we not? And, you get this guy, it's like, no, wait, not when the Apaches are right, in front of them. And I can't remember what they called them, the gunships. They had a name for them, but,
Dragons or no?
Something like that.
Yeah. I remember they used to tell us over the radio.
It might be Dragon. It was something like that. And so we come out of the valley to the Konar River to do our turn and go back in. And the pilot's like, hey, I'm getting low on fuel, but I've got enough for this next run if you want to do one more. And I'm like, yeah, dude, we have already passed up the position for this main guy twice. And it's 7:30 in the morning in Afghanistan. Your FLIR, I mean, a person is the same temperature as the ground, so it's hard to see them visually or with, your sights in the Apache and everything. So somehow we end up 2.5 miles and a mile in front of both Apaches as we do the turn to go back in. And we get in probably 500-600 meters into the valley and just start taking ground fire. And you can see the tracer rounds coming, and then all of a sudden just wham right into the tail of the aircraft. Is that the stabulator on the rear?
Yep.
One of the rockets had barely hit that, but it had dropped that down all the way. So our helicopter pitches up on its nose. I'm looking through. I'm in the very rear seat facing forward. And I can see all the way through the pilot's windscreen, and there's the rapids, like filling the whole windscreen. I'm like, oh, damn, we're dead. Like immediately, I thought it was going to flip all the way over. And, we're still a few hundred feet off the riverbed. So I'm like, this is not. But the pilot, Jason, he got it level and kept flying. And we reported into the Apaches where we were taking fire from. And at that point, our ammunition was cooking off. And so we had a small fire on board. There's rounds pinging. One of the door gunners was shooting his door gun and his M240 or whatever, and was also putting the fire out with the fire extinguisher at the same time. And I'm just like, this is like war. This is war right now, And I can see a smoke trail kick off kind of parallel to us. And you think somebody tripped or misfired or whatever the Taliban guys do. And it just took a hard left and started coming straight at my face. And I leaned back, and it comes right through the open door and punches through the ceiling, and took out the left side engine and about a half of one of the rotor blades. And
this is an RPG. What is it? Can't be.
SA-7. SA-7.
Yeah, it's directional. Okay.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Which that was touchy for a long time, but we can say it now.
Okay.
But yeah, we got it by two most likely SA-7s, probably Iranian. And yeah, at that point, it was like being on a mechanical bull. I mean, that helicopter is just, and we go, we're on fire, we're going down, and the pilot lands it on its belly. The landing gear pops up, and I mean, we slammed extremely hard. We all got injured, but it stayed upright. Yeah, and we got off and set up security, and pulled out the sensitive items and started seeing the radios from the bird and all that. And we were getting ready to blow it. And, we're calling up. And at this point, there are quite literally people in the Pentagon listening. As soon as an aircraft goes down, that when an aircraft goes down, that's a kind of a global situation for them. Mm-hmm. And there's people way above Siege of SOT-A from the 82nd who own the helicopters making the decision, no, do not destroy that aircraft. Do not. So we ended up small contact on the ground. And then we had a spare Blackhawk that came up with us, and he was in Iraq just in case ours, had mechanical issues or whatever. And he just, guy named John Holmes, jumped in his Blackhawk and flew up there and picked us up. He landed in the river, and this thing is roaring. It's a glacial melt river, 14,000 feet, just roaring. And he comes in and puts the belly of that aircraft right at water level, and we wait out 10, 15 feet and start wounded dudes and sensitive items chucking it on. And one of the Apaches that was with us, she stayed on station the whole time and was, I don't know, 100 feet above us, 150 feet above us, just schwacking bad guys. She was just above us, just, turning her bird like this, just
wow.
Tick, 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 and he flies in, picks us up, and we get out of there.
Dude. So
yeah, it was insane.
And were you still listening on the radios after the hit? Did you still have intercept capability on the ground or no?
No. Because after we hit the ground, we immediately pulled security and then set up our SATCOM to the rear out of like my backpack. We ended up using an embedder radio with a small little handheld SATCOM antenna. At that point, it is strip the antennas, put them in a pile, get ready to shoot them, grab that, that black box that we got from the Baltimore area. Because that is more important than all of our lives at that point. That's one of those things you die defending.
Man. And for people listening, that's like your crypto, right?
Yeah, it's how I listen to them. A very complex machine with classified software and inner workings and stuff. So
this thing, obviously, you took small arms fire. You took a hit on the tail,
mm-hmm.
and a missile into the airframe,
into the cabin. Yeah.
Oh Lord! And you were strapped in, obviously.
Yeah. So we were in seats. So I had my whatever 5-point harness, 4-point, whatever it is. I did not have the top straps to it because I had to keep leaning down to mess with my equipment while we were in flight. But yeah, as soon as we got hit the first time, we stopped doing the intel thing and we're shooting out the side doors. And again, so we're, you've been up there, we're in the mountain valley.
Yeah.
So the bad guys aren't shooting up at us. They're shooting straight at us. They're on the mountain too. So, we're looking straight out of the doors, engaging dudes. And, it was pretty wild. It was pretty wild.
Was this before or after that 07 like Bin Laden attempt?
This is that was July 20th, and we ended up going in for the UBL thing. I think we infilled like August 5th or something like that. It was only a couple weeks later because we exactly a week on the 27th. The 173rd Airborne Brigade, one of their cavalry airborne cav squadrons was up in that area by Kamdesh, and they made contact with a very large enemy force, and their troop commander was killed and drug away. So they called us in to find him. The bad guys were actually taunting the Americans on his radio, and they drug him into a cave. So we came in and located the cave and brought him back. A guy named Bostic, and he got the Distinguished Service Cross for what he did that day. But so then, we were actually in Jalalabad, yeah, outside of Jalalabad when we got called to go up there for him. They call it a dust one. Is that right? The duty status whereabouts unknown or something.
Yeah.
MIA.
Forgotten this.
Yeah.
I just interviewed a guy named Mike Rutledge, who he's a former SEAL and then 160th pilot. And I went to flight school with him actually. So like we were just reminiscing. I remember seeing him as a flight school student because he had a Trident on, and I was like, "What the hell? We got guys with, we got SEALs in here."
That's crazy.
But he was on that raid, so we were talking about that 07 Bin Laden attempt.
So when the Rangers all broke their ankles and stuff.
Yeah. So he said they brought in so many guys to do this hit, like, and that was part of the lessons learned for 2011. I think it was when we actually did the hit. You know, narrow down who gets to play in this party. And he was the spare aircraft. So like he had to warm up an MH-47. And then, you know, if one other MH-47 broke on takeoff, like they'd run over and hop in his. For whatever reason, lead broke. They couldn't jump to his. So he and the co-pilot had to fly lead for this thing. And they were expecting to just be like sitting on the bench.
Right.
So he's like the amount of pressure was immense.
I think a couple of the pictures I sent you are actually from that mission. I know one, I'm sitting there with my M21 and a kind of a boonie cap. But yeah, so we went up there. We were up there for like 8 days in those mountains in a hide site. It was me, and I was with an Air Force combat controller, and then our ODA team medic. And we had, I think there was like 9 of us up there total, but we were in 3 different, you know, sites. I was with the mission support site, the MSS. So we were actually one of the blocking positions for people coming out of that valley. And man, I was up on that hill. They bombed that area all night long for 3 days straight. It was like World War II, like all night. It was just, I mean, just all night. We had B-2s coming in from Missouri. I mean, you're right. I mean, they were shooting HIMARS at him from Jalalabad.
Yes, that's what he was saying. Like,
it was just,
and for people who don't know HIMARS, I mean, think of like artillery on steroids. It literally closes down air corridors across an entire country. Like we couldn't fly certain places because they were firing these things. Yeah, that's no joke.
Yeah, and then, you know, whatever, the 7th night we were there, they ended up air assaulting in the Rangers and then the strike force. But yeah, I don't know. I think they went in to do battle damage assessment to see if all those bombs and rockets had done anything. But we ended up losing two guys from ODA 741 on that. They were going in on a vehicular blocking position, you know, outside the valley, and they struck an IED. So, yeah. God. 2 ODA guys, a PSYOP soldier, and then an American citizen interpreter all died in that. So 4 people, actually.
And I think from what I recall, like it obviously was a dry hole, but I do think like we believed he was in the area actually at that time. Maybe not. So
we know for 100% fact that Zawahiri was in that Lunde Sindh Valley, right? And we go in, confirm his presence, and get shot down. So we miss Zawahiri on the 20th of July.
Sounds like you met him, like you saw him, or you encountered him that day.
Yeah,
you were close.
I mean, I'm passing up these 10-digit grids to the attack helicopters. I'm like, here's the grid, bro. Here's the grid. And they're like, we can't see him. I'm like, just fill it with Hellfires. We'll see if he keeps talking. You know? Like, do a test fire. Like, we do that all the time.
I love it. Yeah.
But and then you roll into, you know, 3 weeks later ish, you know, we miss Bin Laden. But their fidelity on that was extremely high. I think it was almost 90% that he was in that area.
Yeah.
And then, as you know, for the next 4 years, he goes back into about. But
yeah.
Yeah, we had tons of human, tons of SIGINT, tons of everything that he was there.
And you guys were out forward position like a week in advance, huh?
Yeah, we weren't supposed to be. What happened was we were supposed to be there 48 hours before the hit, and weather delays in like Missouri and Qatar, and they couldn't take the bombers out. They couldn't fly the bombers out of, the B-2s out of Missouri. And yeah, so we had to wait for the bombers for days and days.
That is surprising.
Yeah.
Man. It's funny. We, as you were talking about that Blackhawk being on the ground and, talking about, do we destroy it? There were a couple times where we had to take shots at Blackhawks that were just sitting there after a crash. And we waited for, man, I think it was maybe a B-1 to drop ordnance on it.
Yeah.
We were just circling for so long. And we're like, dude, just hit this target. And it kept missing this Blackhawk on the ground. We're like, please let us take this shot. And they're like, don't use a Hellfire on it. We're like, come on. We had to do these strafing runs to keep people away from it. I don't know. Like maybe it wouldn't have done enough damage to I don't know. But we were thinking, the bomber's not hitting this. Just let us go in here and knock this thing out and go home.
Missing it.
Oh, geez.
That's so funny.
Tell me about Colombia, because I know we had touched a little bit on this before we started recording, and I really wanted to hear.
Yeah. So, while I was in 7th Group, I ended up deploying to Colombia twice, 6-month trips, in support of hostage rescue operations that were going on down there. We had 3 American contractors and a Colombian presidential candidate that had been kidnapped and were being held by the FARC, their Colombians insurgency group. And so we ended up working with a lot of different, agencies and entities, military, civilian, host nation. And at one point in 2005, we were down in a town called San Vicente de Caguan, and that's where that presidential candidate, her name was Ingrid Betancourt, she was kidnapped from that town, and it was also about 50 kilometers from where the contractors had been picked up when their aircraft had mechanical failure and went down. So at one point everybody thought they knew kind of where these guys were, and they had a camp picked out that they'd found on imagery and other platforms. So our task was, there was 3 of us SOT-A guys, and then we had 2 guys from our what used to be called the Commanders in Extremis Force from 7th Group. So there's a company in each SF group that does like direct action and kind of the tier 1 unit missions, but more on a regional basis, not exactly the same. And our job was to go to the small airport outside San Vicente, so an actual airport, and surreptitiously take over the air traffic control tower. And so we basically just drove up to this airport and just kept driving and drove all the way out to the tower, got out, picked the lock on the door to the tower, and we, the 5 of us go up the stairs. And there's 2 air traffic controllers sitting there with their coffee, like, how are you guys? And we're like, we're not here to hurt you. We're not. This is okay. Here's the deal. But we had to do it so that the FARC or whoever didn't get forewarning that here in 20 minutes there's going to be 15 aircraft landing at this airport from the 160th, and there was a fixed wing like a DC-3 or whatever, the old World War II type plane, like a CH-47 or C-47, coming in with like the Colombian, like their version of the Secretary of Justice, some stuff like that, Justice Department stuff. I mean, they're high-ranking people, and so they come in, they all land. These air traffic controllers are still in charge. They're still doing their air traffic control. We're up there doing SIGINT, and then the 2 CIF guys are making sure these guys don't make phone calls they're not supposed to. So yeah, here comes the Colombians and the Americans, and they land. They all fuel up, and they take off and go on their mission. And one of the things that always struck me was, speaking of bombers, the Colombians dropped 2 500-pounders on this camp before the force went in. And the whole time we're thinking, the hostages are there. Why are you bombing it first? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So their bombs go way off, because I think they were dumb bombs. I think they were off of some type of prop old fighter plane, and they just missed. But yeah, they went in, did the raid.
Maybe a good thing that they missed.
Yeah.
Right.
Captured a bunch of bad guys, brought them back to the airport, and we did the SSE on all the technical stuff that came out of it. And yeah, we ended up coming up with, frequency, call sign, code word charts and things and stuff for the FARC. And yeah, that all led to, it moved that mission, forward. We were able to intercept the FARC for probably about a month before they swapped up. And then it didn't take too long to find them, because their changes weren't that major.
Did they get the hostages?
Not that time. They ended up putting them in 2008, which is a really great story. And there's a book about it and documentary, but they ended up going in on another surreptitious type mission and posing as the International Red Cross, and landed a helicopter and picked up the hostages for humanitarian reasons, so they could be checked by doctors and then transported to another FARC camp while they were just flown away to safety. So,
man, I hope that doesn't stop us from using that again, because that sounds like a great one.
Yeah, that was not SOT-A's. It was another unit, which I'm sure you probably experienced. But
okay, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
I'm curious, all this time listening. Well, first of all, when you were in South America, were you then like reverting to your Spanish skills? Like, were you the one listening in and doing all that?
Yeah. It was, and that was really cool for me. Was being down in Colombia. There were times we went out, 2 of us with the Colombian Army with their mobile brigade, and went out and did patrols out on the jungle.
That's cool.
And I'm working out of a agency safe house down there. I've got what they call a circuit rider. I don't remember those guys. And I was staying in his house, and we hung out with him, and he'd go do his stuff. He said, "You might know the guy when we're done taping."
Yeah, when we're done.
This guy's a legend. He's not Billy Waugh, but he's another legend. So but yeah, it was awesome, because I was 6 months. I'm speaking Spanish, and the only time I'm not is when it's just me and my 2 teammates jaw jacking, which was not that often. We were really busy both times. We're on hostage rescue missions. We're on, they had their presidential inauguration down there in 2006. President Uribe was reelected, and Condoleezza Rice was down there, and some other dignitaries. So we were on their motorcade and security with the Secret Service, and ended up busting out a bomb plot. Kind of.
That's cool.
Backwards false flag type deal. But yeah,
still,
it was really cool doing everything in Spanish and actually doing that job.
One of the things I want to ask you about in a bit is any of the funny things that you may have overheard people say. But before I get there, I will say, when I had to learn French for my work at the agency, you learn vocabulary for the job, like counterterrorism stuff, economics, politics. But I would imagine with what you're doing, you kind of have to have a really broad set of vocab, right? Because you got to be listening to just day to day, probably talking to the wife. How are the kids?
All that.
Like, how's the homework going? All the basics, so you can interpret and determine when something's important or not.
Yeah, even bad guys have normal conversations, and he might be talking to somebody, a random conversation, be like, "Oh, I'm going to be out of town Thursday. I'm going to this town." We're like, "Awesome. We'll see you in that town, bro." So, but yeah, I mean, DLI out in California gives you a really good basis, kind of general basis of the language. And you can become, pretty close to fluent at a similar age. So if you're a college educated person, you can come out of there with a college level, vocabulary and speaking abilities. But and then after that, I went through different courses through the NSA on counter narcotics, translation, transcription, and code words, and went to one on counter corruption, political influence. That was a really cool course.
In that, is it? I mean, I have to imagine you're learning whatever the nuances are of that target set, like what are the terms that you would use for counter narcotics or counter proliferation? Like they all have to have their own vocab in English. You're learning that. Is that kind of what you're getting?
How do senators talk to each other? Stuff like that. I mean, it was really crazy.
That is cool.
Really interesting. So, yeah, and again, I got to do it in Latin America, and I went on a few other trips, but the Colombian ones are really the exciting ones, and the ones that you can really kind of expand upon. But just having done it, and now I substitute teach, and I work as a translator for a couple of businesses. They'll give me a call if they have a customer that comes in, and send them a bill for $25 for helping somebody. But yeah, Spanish has been great. I love it.
What are some of the funny things you remember people talking about? And I only ask this because, and maybe you don't have any that you recall, but I do distinctly remember at the agency when we'd be looking through intel and like some guy fighting with his wife over getting the camel from one place to the next. And it was just like, this sounds like my home, my wife yelling at me about something, but it's just a different part of the world. So it sounds amusing at this point.
This one's kind of dark, but I told this story before, but it's still one of my favorites because I'd forgotten about it for a long time and just got reminded a few months back by my buddy. But we go out on a quick reaction force mission. There were some American, the MTT guys, the trainers that are embedded with the Afghans,
mobile training teams,
and they'd made contact. So we roll down there, and there's a guy that's directing the enemy mortar fire down on us. And we're getting mortared and stuff. But so we immediately intercept this guy. We throw lines of bearing at him, azimuths. We're trying to look and see where he's at. And, he's on a hillside. My buddy is up in the truck running the direction finding equipment. And he's like, man, I can see him. And I'm like, where? And he's like, he's right there, And so I start shooting the M240 off the back of the truck. We call the trunk monkey. Just for tracer fire, just for tracer
fire. Like, am I close? Oh, no,
right.
Go left, right? Yeah.
Right. Because we've got an Air Force combat controller that wants to drop on this guy. And all of a sudden you hear, the bad guy says, I think I'm good. The Americans are shooting too low. So my buddy Craig, my teammate, he's like, dude, elevate. So I've got this M240 like this. This dude's like a mile away, And then you hear, oh, somebody help me. They hit me. And so, we have like the guy talking about me shooting him, like live. Like, no, they're too low,
And you're like lobbing these rounds.
It's like plunger fire.
Like it's Angry Birds or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jesus.
Yeah, you can see the tracers just, He's like, oh, they're not even close. Oh, they're too low. Oh, they hit me. It's just like, dude, stop talking. Stop talking.
Were there times where you ended up like communicating back with these people? Was there even a capability to do that? Or if we can't talk about it, don't. That's totally fine.
Yeah, that's a different kind of thing. But obviously our Afghan partners, we're using the walkie-talkie of choice in that part of the world is a company called ICOM, and the model is ICV8. And it's just a little, like a Motorola walkie-talkie, right? And bad guys use them, good guys use them. So we sent one of our sources out, and he bought us a bunch of those. And we would just sit there and use the actual radio the bad guys on. We'd turn it, they'd be like, go to channel 3, and we'd click ours to channel 3, Every once in a while, you'd get an Afghan commander like run up, grab the radio out of your hand, and just chew out these Taliban dudes, egging them on. Your mother's a pig, your father's a dog. he's the dirt, and it's just like, dudes, I'm trying to get him to shoot at us. And you're like, okay, I guess keep talking to him. But there was one time in Colombia, and again, that type of work on our side of the house has to be authorized. It's almost like a sniper taking a shot or firing an artillery round. That stuff has to be cleared because you can't expose, your tactics and techniques by doing that, or just exposing yourself, right? But there were a couple times, like on call outs, we would surround a building, bad guys lob grenades or whatever, and we would get on their radio and be like, hey, you're not getting out of this alive, just come outside. And they were,
but then you got the ground force commander probably saying, hey, go ahead and do it.
Right. Yeah, and we've got to have clearance, for that kind of stuff. But I can't remember what they call that. I think it's called like MIJI, M-I-J-I is the term for that, when you intrude on someone's conversations.
Interesting. Yeah, I did not know that. We'll get to the Afghan pullout here. I was curious how close you got to your terps, your interpreters. I have to imagine, like, in that role you're in, it's got to be real close.
Yeah, and like I said, most of my sidekick terp, was an American citizen, but we also worked with the local guys a lot. The SF teams would have one or two, and then you've got people in those Afghan partner forces you work with that could be a terp, but they're an Afghan soldier, but they're with us and they speak fluent English. And then I worked some with the Afghan. They were called the NDS. It was their intelligence directorate, National Directorate of Security, I believe. So those guys were, local individuals that were assets, and we would use them for interpretation or cultural guides as we were trying to go somewhere, like low vis operations, get us through checkpoints and things like that. And I mean, some of the greatest people I've ever met. And it's funny because we talk about this like great religious divide between Christianity or Judeo-Christian thought and Islam. And I never experienced that with any of the people that I dealt with, local interpreters, soldiers. We were all just people. And it's the bad guys that have that, mindset.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a guy named Ishmael that we ended up bringing over back home, or bringing over right before the fall of Kabul. But yeah, he I ducked, some rounds hit side of a building. I'm behind a corner, I duck, and he pops out and smokes the guy for me. And it's like, how do you not love that person, like the soldier next to you with the American flag on? Just it's that type of connection with it. All of these soldiers and veterans are, that are talking about these people they worked with. It wasn't a casual work relationship. It's not like they were in the next cubicle over, nice guy. It's a pretty blood in, blood out type relationship. So
that's one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of that. It's definitely not in the cubicle next door.
Mm-hmm.
God. What when did you start trying to get involved in that process of pulling them out? When did you see that happening?
So I was working on a degree, on a graduate degree in international public policy, and I was concentrating on women and children's education. We kind of had to pick a global issue and then bring different entities together to try and solve those or improve those. And so I met a young girl named Nasima on LinkedIn, actually. And she had been a young schoolgirl when I was in Jalalabad running around, and I didn't know her or anything, but just talking through time, and then ended up kind of using her as part of a case study, and just talking about what it was like to go to school with the Americans there. And it got to be about last July, maybe, or not the July of 21. Yeah. And, the writing was on the wall. Kandahar had already been taken over. The Taliban was moving from west to east and kind of north to south. And, I started working on would you like to get out of Afghanistan? She was set to graduate college in December of 21. So I had started figuring out how to do kind of the whole visa process and, requesting of that amnesty and stuff, and working with her. And we ended up getting two of our former partners out during this time frame as well. So, a couple months prior, month and a half prior to the actual emergency, if you will. And then, the storm happened, and I got a few messages on Signal and WhatsApp and stuff from different individuals. I know you interviewed Scott Mann a couple months ago.
Yep.
He was actually my battalion 3 or XO in 7th Group.
Wow.
He was one of the 2 majors in the battalion. I don't remember which job, but talking to guys from no one left behind in the beginning was big. There were some other guys, Dan Stinson, who Raven Group International, they raised millions of dollars. We rented airplanes from the UAE and like Air Force aircraft. We rented them and flew them in, and we had guys. I stayed back here. I was doing processing, vetting, kind of some rat line type stuff, and then we actually had guys on the ground,
intel type work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, you talk about getting close with people. One of the guys I worked really close with at the Afghan NDS ended up being the Afghan ambassador to Sri Lanka.
Wow.
So during the fall, I was talking to him on LinkedIn and then WhatsApp, and he was talking back to Afghanistan, getting ground truth, relaying it to me, who I was relaying it forward to the guys on the ground in Afghanistan, so they knew, hopefully which villages they could roll through and stuff. But yeah,
wow.
It got, there's so many groups of people doing that. We had kind of called the digital Dunkirk. There was loosely affiliated groups or whatever have you, and it's funny, it just seems to be the same people, the same type of people that end up in these groups and efforts.
Clay, can you explain the Dunkirk reference? I really like that. I think it makes total sense for people who don't understand that that reference.
Well, and I think in World War II, what the SOE and was it the SOS, the OSS and the SOE, the British and American and Canadian intelligence assets and forces were run out of Dunkirk over, is it England or Scotland that Dunkirk's in? I think it's England.
I mean, they were pulling people out from France, from England, France, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And bringing them out. Evacuation of high risk individuals, high value individuals and stuff. And so I don't know who came up with some of these terms. But yeah, it was basically groups of individuals. We had a guy that was my state senator at the time, went on TV talking about needing support. A guy named Zach Nunn, worked with him and a bunch of other people. I don't know if you knew Zach at the agency or not.
I did not know.
He was an Air Force SIGINT officer in Afghanistan, flying on overhead platforms. So good guy. And then he got elected to U.S. Congress for my area in Iowa.
That's interesting.
So,
yeah.
And he was actually in that hearing a couple weeks ago with where Scott Mann and all those guys talked, and so Zach was in on that. But
cool.
The whole digital Dunkirk was just a bunch of people like, hey, I've got this friend, or I know this person that needs out, and who do you know, and who's your contact at the State Department, who do you know on the ground in Afghanistan, and who are the guys that are going to houses and escorting people. And God, yeah, it was crazy. No exaggeration, I was probably spending 20 hours a day on whiteboards and my phone and having stuff on my laptop plotted out and literally talking to people in Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Qatar. There's a lady in Italy that was helping out, you know.
Man, I really like, and I would just say, like, I think that Dunkirk reference is so good because Dunkirk is like a beach in France where the military had to get pulled out of, and they literally had just civilians in England get their fishing boats and go across the channel and pick up people and take them back. It wasn't all military service. So I think it's a great analogy because like, yeah, you were in the military, but your uniform is off for this op.
Yeah. You know, and that's what I think a lot of us say is, you know, I had been out of the Army for 11 years at that point. You know, all of us, you know, we're in our second lives, second careers, you know, so far detached from that. And at this point, a lot of guys are just not thinking about or trying not to think about Afghanistan anymore.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I guess I got to put my boots on and go back to work, you know.
It's a different place, you know, it's on the phone and WhatsApp and that. Yeah.
And then we had a bunch of guys that got on planes on their own dime and went there.
Yeah.
And left the wire to bring their friends to the airport and then went back. I mean, we had teams of kitted up guys, 50-year-old dudes going out to grab their friend and bring him to the airport, you know. I'm serious. You know?
No, it's great. The older I get, I'm like, I could probably still go do this. You know, I think we all say that.
Yeah.
Then you got 110 pounds on your back again. One of the things I like to ask people, Clay, that kind of a newer addition to the question book here is, as you look back on your time, what is the most courageous thing that you remember seeing? It could be on the conventional side, could be a SF realm, but something that you just kind of watched. And I mean, even what you mentioned with one of these Afghan colleagues, you duck down and they take a shot and save your life. What comes to mind for you?
I think there's kind of two competing ones, but I had a young guy that joined my team probably 5 months before that deployment in 2007. You know, by all accounts, kind of a nerdy kid, real techie, you know, all the, you know, the role play game, you know, like Dungeons and Dragons and little figurines and stuff. And grew up affluent in California, Orange County. You know, dad had a Ferrari, that kind of stuff. And we get over there and great, amazingly, you know, brilliant and stuff, but just not the guy you would expect to want to do that job. And we're in a small town, I think it was Pitagol up in Nuristan. And we were doing an op that night. We hit 3 villages at the same time, a couple different SF companies, like 5 ODA teams.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a big company size.
That's a big hit.
Jeez. Yeah. He rolls, and you know, we're SOT-A guys. Again, we're not door kickers or operators, but at this point, you know, you're taking over a village with 12 other guys. Hey, Clay, take that house. It's like, okay, I got it. You know, Brandon comes up. Brandon comes up to the door, and I'm on the roof of this house because they're built into the side of the hill, so kind of like an earth home. And I'm coming across the roof, and he just says, he doesn't yell it. He just goes, "Grenade!" And I like get off to the side. I thought he threw a grenade into the house. Somebody had thrown a grenade at him. It hit him in the leg and hit the ground, and he kicked it back inside. Like a little soccer ball, just boop. And then backs up and goes, "Grenade." And I'm like, "Dude, why did you throw a grenade? I'm on the damn roof." And he's like, "I didn't throw a grenade. They threw it at me. I kicked it back in there." And I'm like, "What?" You know, like, I mean, it just, but, and then, you know, we're like, team leaders, like, the ODA team leaders, like, "Well, do you think you killed him?" And Brandon just looks at him. He's like, "Oh, I know I did." You know, and it was just like, here's this skinny dude, you know, surfer kid from California, "Grenade." And I'm like, hit him in the leg, and he kicked it back in there. And I'm just like, Didn't even need to change his underwear, like that's, to me, that's, pretty ballsy.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's funny as hell.
Yeah.
One of the other things I like to ask, because you had mentioned that you'd been out on your own for 7 days, on that Bin Laden potential hit.
Yeah.
You're out on your own with the folks forward deployed, probably eating, I don't know, MREs, I got to guess.
Oh yeah. 100%.
All right. What's
we
your,
stripped them down. We had to get resupplied on water by an Apache.
No.
They flew up there, opened the Wizzo or whoever in the front, opened the screen and chucked down two little flats of water to us.
Really?
Yeah. 100%. We were dying up there. We were supposed to be up there for 48 hours. We ended up being there for...
So you're not prepared.
No.
So my question is, do you have having probably had your fair share of MREs, do you have a favorite or one that you really hate?
Yeah, I don't like the minestrone because I'm allergic to not eating meat. So if you want to give me the veggie minestrone, I'm probably going to throw it at you because it doesn't have any meat in it. I would say I'm tied. Spaghetti and beef stew. They both come with nacho cheese. You throw the Tabasco in there with it and crush up your crackers. I mean, it's 2,500 calories in 2.5 minutes. I mean, you can't beat that. So,
is there an item in an MRE that you would trade almost anything for?
Nacho cheese. I will give you a Gerber or a Leatherman or I can't live without the nacho cheese and the cracker.
I love it, man. So last 2 questions that I ask everybody. One is there anything you carried with you when you were downrange that had sentimental value, something that somebody gave you or you just wanted to have with you?
Oh, grab it. So right before I deployed to Iraq, my sister-in-law was younger, freshman in college. She'd moved out to North Carolina to live with us and go to school out there. And so at the Airborne and Special Ops Museum, she got me this St. Michael, a sterling silver St. Michael. And then I made it up to Badakhshan, Afghanistan, where the Uyghurs are, and got a little jade Buddha that's on the same little handcart jade Buddha that's on the same. So I always have this guy. So,
wow, the yin and yang right there.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's just cool. Yeah.
You're one of the very few who still has something within arm's reach. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I got my little I love me shelf back here, So.
And then question I ask everybody, Clay, looking back on your time downrange, sacrifice, time away from home. I know you did a lot of deployments.
Yeah.
Would you go back and do that again?
Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. Watching the whole ISIS evolution just killed me. I wanted to be there, I just felt, And even today, I miss the hunt, the chase, and the people. Miss just being around those people all the time.
Yeah, not alone, man. Well, anything else, Clay, to share with people before we break? I know you've been very active with helping out our Afghan allies. Anything else you'd put on people's radar?
I would just say, again, I've been advocating and lobbying Congress and senators for the Afghan Adjustment Act. I think having a pathway to safely and securely bring our allies in a controlled, situation with some forethought. I think we have to set up a system to do that. It needs to be productive and safe for everyone involved, and I think we owe it to those people, and we owe it to the other veterans, to do what's right.
Well said.
Yeah.
Clay, thank you so much for the time, man.
Thanks.
Been a lot of fun talking intel stuff with the tactical guy. Thank you, man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. Got a couple listener comments that we wanted to share. The first are 3 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. Just want to say thank you for leaving these. It's from Grand Slam 315, who said, "Saving history, amazing guy preserving history and helping many people with their PTSD. Thank you for your service and all you do." And I'm not sure which particular interview that is in relation to, but we do touch on post-traumatic stress in several, so thank you for leaving that. Got JBoy1115 said, "Fantastic stories. These people are our finest warriors." You know that I agree. We've got DKB106 who said, "Amazing, great podcast, love your interview style." So just wanted to say thanks. Every time we get one of these 5-star reviews, more people hear these veteran stories on Apple and Spotify and these other places. Then on YouTube, we had one from a subscriber, Blue Angel Phantoms. They said, this was about the Matthew Wiz Buckley interview. So this is another pilot. Says, "I just want to compliment the interviews featured on this channel and found Mr. Buckley's 9/11 and American Airlines experience fascinating." For those who haven't listened to the episode, Wiz has this great description of where he was right after 9/11. He had just transitioned out of the Air Force, but was still in the Guard. He had to go and scramble to take somebody down who was in U.S. airspace. Really interesting, but that's where this is coming from. And he goes on to say, "He definitely has a gift for storytelling, and major kudos to the host, Ryan. Does a fantastic job leveraging his own experience to add to the conversation without taking away from his guest. Outstanding." And I just wanted to say a huge thank you for leaving that comment. It means a ton, especially from who I have to imagine is another aviator with Blue Angel Phantoms. So thank you for leaving that. And you're spot on. Wiz is a fantastic storyteller. Guy's got his hands in so many different irons in the fire, I should say. Not just in the aviation realm, but investing and helping vets with different ways to heal some of their post-traumatic stress. So thank you for leaving that. Thank you all for listening, and stay safe.